Welcome to the Leading Owls podcast, brought to you by Rice University's Door Institute for New Leaders. Each week, we bring you inspiring stories and practical tips from successful student leaders, faculty, and staff, along with leadership experts and coaches that will help guide you in your own leadership journey. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Danielle King, a leading voice in the field of resilience and an associate professor of industrial and organizational psychology at Rice University. Dr. King is the principal investigator of the Working Resilience Research Laboratory, where she explores topics like employee resilience, thriving, and workplace dynamics. Her groundbreaking work has been featured in top academic journals and major outlets like Harvard Business Review. Dr. King is truly shaping the future of resilience research and practice. In this episode, we'll unpack the science of resilience, what it is, why it matters, and how we can all build it in our lives. From overcoming adversity to thriving in high-pressure environments, Dr. King's insights are as practical as they are profound. Whether you're navigating personal challenges or leading teams through uncertainty, this conversation will leave you with strategies and inspiration to foster resilience in yourself and others. Please welcome Danielle. Thanks for joining us, Danielle.
Excited to be here.
Can you tell us about your background and what led you to focus on your research on resilience?
Yes, it is truly me-search, which is what we say when we're studying something that we personally find just to be a critical part of our lives. So I am from New Orleans, Louisiana. Both my parents are entrepreneurs. And so I saw a lot of really interesting dynamics about workplaces and organizations and leadership in my daily life and conversations from my parents. And then when I was in high school, Hurricane Katrina happened. And so I saw significant adversity, disaster that was beyond any of our control. And I also saw a lot of differences in how organizations and businesses not only were affected, but who had the resources to recover. How did we form a new sense of identity and connection post these experiences of Hurricane Katrina? And so all of that together, I think, got me really interested in all three, like leadership, resilience, and also identity, because there were absolutely true disparities in the resilience recovery process based on things like race and socioeconomic status. And so I find that those are all intertwined. And so that's like the personal thing that propelled me to undergrad to study psychology and minor in business, and then pursue the PhD with a focus on my dissertation on resilience.
That's such a beautiful story. And the fact that you turned all that adversity into a life's work, that is so cool.
Thank you. I'm like, I got to do something with it, right? Trying to do something functional with the challenges.
How do you define resilience?
That is a very big question. When I first started reading resilience articles, I was really confused because there's so many different definitions. And I definitely don't walk around saying like mine is the one or the right one. But in our work, we define resilience as continued investment of effort towards your goals despite some challenge or difficulty. And the reason we define it that way is I'm in organizational psychology, so I'm often looking at workplaces where we have a goal that we are assigned. And so thinking about, are we mentally still focusing on that goal? Even if we're needing to step back and take a break, are we taking that rest as a way to continue to pursue that goal? And then what's under our control? Sometimes the resilience literature looks at outcomes that are a bit outside of our control to designate people or, in any moment of behavior as resilient. And I really didn't love that. And so I wanted to focus on what is under our control. And so I actually define it and think about it as the Finding Nemo, the Dory, just keep on swimming.
What have you found to be the key factors that contribute to someone being resilient?
I think resources is actually something that we have not acknowledged to date enough as being a true predictor of resilience. I think we often think about traits like resiliency, like are you born, do you have it? But I think what we don't talk enough about is how when we have resources, and resources can be tangible things like money, it can be the tools and materials we need to pursue a goal. It can be intangible things like energy and time, right? When we have resources, we are more likely to be resilient. So I think that organizations and leaders and contexts can facilitate resilience in ways that are not often talked about beyond this like trait about a person.
Can you share a particularly interesting or surprising finding from your studies on resilience?
Ooh, yeah. I have a couple in mind. So there's actually two papers that kind of go hand in hand, which is nice. One of them I worked on with a collaborator named Kyle Berkman, and he is a lead author on that work. And so he and I have a paper where we looked at team resilience. So what helps teams be resilient? And specifically, what are leaders doing that is helping their teams build this capacity to be able to handle upcoming or potential adversity? And what we found was that when leaders are learning goal-oriented, so when leaders frame things as learning opportunities rather than it's always about performing and being perfect or hitting the mark, when leaders are able to say, we're going to make mistakes, things are going to happen, as long as we learn from it and we reflect on it, that is the purpose, that is the point, that is my emphasis here, even if we're not always perfect. That paired with a climate of voice where people are encouraged and rewarded for speaking up and sharing ideas, even if they aren't in agreement with the leader's ideas. So those two things together really help teams build that capacity for resilience where they're like, my leader is all about learning, and this is a place where I feel like I can speak up. Those two things are what gave team members the resources that they needed to then feel more resilient. And I think that's an interesting one to pair with another study that we did on teams and leadership related to voice. Is we did this really cool study when I was a graduate student on military teams. It was about diversity, and we had one woman on each military team. This is when the Marine Corps was first starting to integrate or consider integrating women into those infantry frontline teams. And so what we did was we created these teams that were either all male or some had one woman on them. And we found that when women spoke up with ideas and those ideas were enacted, when the task was really complex, the teams performed better. So there was value in this integration of women ideas. But the thing that we saw that separated whether or not women's ideas were enacted on or not was the leader's view on could women offer something useful. So it's like leaders bring a lot to these environments before they get there, right? Like your views on certain groups of people. And so feeling like people who are different from us can contribute something is what helps us be open to their voice. And that's part of how we build that voice climate that we showed in our other study helps build team resilience.
That is so cool. That is really, really neat. I find that so fascinating. And I love the learning aspect. I'm going to use that with my children.
Yeah, it works. It's like, the point is learning. The point isn't always performing. And if we learn, we should perform better over time. So you don't have to pick one or the other, but emphasizing that learning. And it's something I do even when I teach. Like I find it really helpful because students are like, what's the rubric? What's going to be graded? What are the points about? And I'm like, actually, let's focus on the content. How much of these things do you really understand? Like, let's remember you're here to learn, not just perform.
What are some common misconceptions about resilience?
Ooh, that's an exciting one because we recently published a Harvard Business Review where we laid out here are pitfalls that we fall into in our thinking about resilience. So one of those pitfalls we talked about was assuming it's a trait, saying you have it or you don't. So we just need to select for it, pick the most resilient people, where really we could also be investing in training and interventions to help people practice resilience and build it while also creating, again, environments and systems that address adversity so we don't have to be resilient so often and give people the resources that will make them more likely to bounce back. So that's one of the things that we generally have misunderstood it to just be a trait that you have or you don't, or you're born with or you're not. Well, really all humans have the capacity to be resilient, right? It's that we need support, we need to learn, we need practice. And then one of the other pitfalls is that sometimes we stigmatize people for having a hard time when things are hard. Like we misunderstand negative emotions like frustration or fear or sadness or crying as they're not resilient, where that's not what the literature shows. There's ample literature on emotions that shows positive emotions are really helpful for resilience, but negative emotions don't prevent resilience. The point is that we're going to feel negative emotion when things are hard. We're human. So we need to embrace that. We need to say it's okay. And we also need to, as individuals and as leaders, help facilitate some positive emotions too. Inject those moments of joy when we can in the hard times, because it's that complex profile of emotions that really helps people be resilient. But I do think sometimes we misunderstand, if a person's complaining or if they're struggling, that they're not resilient, but definitionally, that's not the case.
Is there a way for people to build and strengthen their resilience in everyday life?
Yeah, I think living. You wake up every day, you're going to unexpected challenges and changes. I don't think we need to seek out too much adversity. I don't know many humans who haven't had to practice it. So for better or worse, I think we are going to have lots of opportunities to build it. I think the thing that makes the difference in are those experiences building or depleting our resilience is a couple things. One, are we given space and time in between adversities to process and learn from it and to recover? Because we have found in the literature that when people are just hit back to back to back to back with significant adversities, it's really hard for them to be resilient, in part because they're exhausted. And like I said, it takes energy, it takes resources to overcome things. And so making sure that we give ourselves some time and space to recover when we experience adversity, but also using that space and time to reflect on, okay, what can I learn from this? What worked? What didn't work? What actually does help me recover and what's depleting? Like we get a lot of advice about self-care and, for example, like bubble baths. I hate bubble baths. They stress me out. I have learned, girl, that's not going to build your resilience. Like that's not going to help you recover. So don't do it, right? But I'm like, I actually like exercising. When I go for a run, like I feel better. I feel like my self-efficacy is built up. I'm like the endorphins are pumping. So taking time when things go wrong and when we have to respond to them to learn like, okay, how did I respond? How would I like to respond next time? What did I do that helped me? And what did I do that maybe didn't help me so that the next time we have that toolkit ready?
So speaking of self-care, how do you see resilience intersecting with mental health, especially in terms of recovery from like trauma or burnout?
I think just that. I think that resilience itself means something really challenging and hard has happened to us. So it absolutely is related to mental health because there can be mental health harms from trauma, understandably, and also the ways that we are afforded the opportunities to recover are the things that can protect our mental health while we are being resilient and overcoming this. Because not every stressor or adversity is a one-time thing. Sometimes it's chronic. In my research, I look at things like racism and sexism and discrimination. That's not a one-time thing. That's every day. I don't know when I walk out what's going to happen. I don't know when I walk into this store, which has happened, or people are like, oh, this stuff is really expensive. You probably can't afford, like microaggressions. So it isn't just like take a bubble bath, like racism. No, it's figuring out, okay, how do I want to approach these things? What amount of energy and effort do I want to invest in educating or just setting up boundaries and protecting myself? What works for me to protect my mental health is so important. And so I think we each have to make those decisions and know that it's a personal decision process. We're all going to choose different things, and that's good. Some people are going to choose the battles that I just don't have the energy to choose, and that's necessary. And there are going to be things that I have the capacity to speak up about or handle or help us work through. That is also necessary. And so mental health absolutely can be harmed when we don't recover after adversity. And it is something that is relevant to this process of resilience, protecting it and being mindful of it and being thoughtful about it, not just saying, I'm going to pick all the battles, I'm going to overcome, I'm going to be resilient at the cost of my mental health is something that we don't want to do.
In today's world, with our challenges like the pandemic and climate change, how can communities foster collective resilience?
I love that question because humans, we are such social beings. Some of the adversities are shared. Like I gave the example about a hurricane. We all go through that together. I live in Houston now. We all go through those together. And so it really is an opportunity to lean on one another. And one of the theories that I often draw on in my resilience research is called conservation of resources theory. It's all about how we as humans, we want to protect, we want to build our resources. And one of the concepts in that theory is called resource caravans. It's like resources don't have to just come from us in this very individualistic perspective. Resources can also come from other people, like social support is one of the main predictors across resilience studies that we see is really functional. We need our people. We need to not feel like we're alone. When the last time the power went out, one of my close friends lives around the corner. She gave me some batteries so we could have a fan in here. Like that is an example of the collective support that we all give to each other and that we all need. And then the minute she needs something, if I have it, I'm here for her. That is like one of the silver linings, I think, of adversity too, is even grief, right? It's like learning it's not just us. I have lost very close family members that I love very much. And now I feel like I'm in this club club that nobody wants to be in, but once you're in it, you're in it. Once you know really close grief, you have this connection with other people who've shared that experience, and they can share words of wisdom, and now I can. And I think that's a beautiful part of the collective resilience process, is being able to exchange and share our resources.
I think that maybe is why the pandemic was so difficult, because you didn't have a lot of social support during the pandemic.
Yeah. And everybody's resources were depleted. So it's hard to have a caravan where you're like, oh, right now, like I gave the example of losing a loved one. When someone else does, and I have had some time to recover from my experience, I can be there. I can, talk to them. I can just give them a space to feel heard and to be seen. When we are all taxed and experiencing burnout, it's very hard. And we got really creative. I am completely in awe of just how resilient humans are once again, because we were doing things like our Zoom catch-ups, right? We're having wine with our friends or something non-alcoholic, having fun with people on Zoom. One of my friends and I, we used to go to yoga classes together. So we were on Zoom. We would pick a YouTube video. We would pick the same one, press play at the same time, and do yoga together, but far away. And so I didn't see a true, we are not connected at all. I saw us learning to rely on the technologies we had to find new ways to connect, and even teaching, right? We switched to Zoom and different ways to connect and still continue on with our goals and education. So that was definitely resilience, but it was very exhausting, understandably, because we were all very depleted and there was just so much uncertainty. It's hard to feel hopeful when you're there's no end date to this chronic stressor. So I think we should be really proud of ourselves for how we were able to manage and know that, sometimes it's just really hard, and resilience doesn't always look pretty. That's why I said the negative emotions doesn't mean you're not resilient. Trauma is traumatic, right? You're going to feel some effects, but also I saw a lot of us finding adaptive and healthy ways to still feel connected and build that community.
Do you believe resilience is something we could teach in schools or workplaces?
I do. I think that we could teach what does healthy and adaptive resilience look like. The research has shown that children are just very resilient naturally. Right. Even babies, we just see, they overcome so much. So I think we naturally are inclined towards resilience, but I think that we don't talk enough about when is it time to not be resilient. I think we put a value on always pushing through, where I think we should teach people that there are healthy times to push through. And then there are times where actually pushing through is harming your mental health, is harming your financial well-being, is harming other people. So you need to abandon that goal. You need to not be resilient. I think we stigmatize non-resilience and we think it's wrong, but actually sometimes it's really adaptive and healthy. So I think that's something we could teach children and people in organizations a bit more.
What are some emerging trends or areas of research in resilience that you're excited about?
I am most excited about us starting to think about resources. So not just you have it or you don't, but how can resilience be supported? And I'm really excited about us thinking about power and privilege and identity and how it is innately relevant to this conversation. Those examples I gave earlier of sexism and racism and xenophobia, it's there are certain things that some people have to be resilient to every day that we don't even acknowledge in some of our resilience research. We just say, oh, but this like the pandemic, it happened. But if I was caring for elderly parents, my experience was different, right? Or if I am immunocompromised, my experience was different. And so I'm really excited that resilience is starting to pay attention to who we are, what our experiences are, and how that calls on our resilience more often, and that there may be different types of resources we need depending on those types of things.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to pursue research or a career in the field of resilience?
What's nice is there's a lot of ways you can do it. So I think be open to a lot of different career options and opportunities. If you're interested in doing this from a psychological lens, that could be in a lot of different areas of psychology, right? Child development research looks at resilience among children, and in clinical psych, there's a lot of research on resilience among different populations, including those in the military. And if you want to pursue resilience in industry, there's a lot of interest now in organizations around building these interventions and trainings, which is really excited. And what I do in terms of resilience research among adult populations and those in the workplace, it's exciting that we have this whole, sandbox to play in where we don't have as much research on adults. And so I would say get as much research experience as you can, all of the periods of life or the experiences of life before you apply to graduate school. And then there's a lot to be done. And so I think there's no shortage of opportunities for people to do research in this area and still have really novel and interesting and important things to contribute, because also the adversities that we're facing change over time. Now we have AI, we have technology. We need to understand, how is that going to support our resilience? How is that going to create new challenges and opportunities for overcoming, right? Our workforce is changing. There's a lot of virtual working and telework, and we need to understand how is that shaping our connection to each other? How is that shaping our access to resources? So basically, I would say get your foot in the water in terms of getting experience in the resilience area that you want to pursue, and then make sure it feels like a good fit, because there's a lot of work to be done.
I love that you talked about me search. That's awesome. I'd never heard that. So how has studying resilience affected your own approach to challenges in your personal and professional life?
I can't take credit for the me search term. I don't remember where I heard that, but I think that the reason I pursued it was because I knew there was so much I didn't understand. I was observing a lot of patterns, but I didn't understand why differences were manifesting in the way they were. And so I do feel like studying it has given me an opportunity to learn a lot more about it, which is exciting, the why of some of these effects that we're observing. And I think as a really curious person, knowing why gives me such joy and comfort. So I can say that. And I do find myself feeling called to be as resilient as possible, because I'm you study this. You got to practice what you preach. You get up there and you teach about it. If I have slides that are social support, I can't isolate when things feel hard, right? Or if I do, I try not to do it for too long. If that's something that's helping me recover, taking some time, still also, asking for help when I need it. Because I tell people social support is only possible when people know we need support. And we're often really hesitant to ask for help, but giving people help helps those helpers. It boosts people's emotional experience and their efficacy and their feeling of connection when you ask for help. And so I think it's helped me practice what I study and what I preach a lot more.
For a final takeaway for listeners, what's one thing they could do to build resilience in their lives?
I think one thing we could all do is to allow ourselves to be human, give ourselves some grace and say, when things are hard, it's okay. You don't have to feel if it's hard for me, then something is wrong with me or I'm not being resilient. And recognize that what's hard for you is hard for you. It doesn't have to be validated by other people. Even if it's not hard for them, that doesn't mean something's wrong with you. We have our own experience of adversity and resilience. So I think giving ourselves some grace in the process and allowing ourselves to explore and figure out what helps me recover, what helps me rebuild my resources, those would go a long way for the inevitable adversities that we're going to face throughout our lifetime and throughout our careers.
I think that's such a fascinating thing that I've learned from you today is the part about the negative emotions are okay and that you need that healing time, that recovery time in between, that actually is important, because I feel like some people feel like they have to get right back at it, and you actually need to take that time to recover.
Whatever that time is for you. There's research now on micro breaks. Maybe it's a 5-minute walk during the day. For some people, maybe it's a week of going away and being in a cabin in a forest. A lot of us don't have the privilege or the luxury to do it. So it's what can I do today? If it's journaling, for me, I meditate in the mornings. If it's calling a friend to just vent, if it's watching mindless TV on the couch, whatever it is, if it's going for a run, right? Finding those things that you can do throughout, not once you're at the point of burnout, before you get there, so that you maybe won't go down the path to burnout. I think that's really important that we all should get curious about and explore.
And then I love the part about the social support and how important it is, because I feel like so many of us keep it locked inside until it's too late, until we're in the full burnout phase.
Mm-hmm. And you will be pleasantly surprised, like I said, to see just how much it actually also helps other people when they have capacity and when they're able to hear you and see you and be there for you. It's really mutually beneficial because that form of connecting to you and helping you helps them feel more connected to a network and to a resource caravan. It really is a beautiful experience. It takes some vulnerability. It takes us doing it when we feel ready. But I think just hoping for the best and expecting good from seeking that social connection could go a long way.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Danielle. I feel like I've learned so much and that I feel more resilient just from talking to you and learning about resilience.
I love it. I'm happy to hear it.
Thank you for joining us for the Leading Owls podcast. We will be back next week with more leadership journeys and tips to share. New episodes release each Wednesday. For more information on the Door Institute for New Leaders and our free leader development programs for Rice students, please visit door.rice.edu.